Today, we're ranking every Japanese World War II fighter, from the weakest designs to the most legendary aircraft ever built. Starting with the worst Japanese fighter. Number 20, Nakajima Ki-27 Tsurugi. There is no better place to start this ranking than with an aircraft that was never designed to survive its own mission. The Ki-27 Tsurugi was built in early 1945 when Japan's aircraft industry was collapsing under the weight of bombing raids, fuel shortages, and a shrinking pool of trained pilots. Engineers were told to design something that could be built quickly, cheaply, and by unskilled labor, using whatever engines happened to be sitting in storage. The result was a wooden airframe with fixed, non-retractable landing gear that was meant to simply drop away after takeoff because the aircraft was never going to need it again. This was a kamikaze weapon from the very first sketch, built for pilots with only basic training to fly one bomb-laden trip into an American ship. Production began, hundreds were built, but the war ended before it saw combat. It ranks at the very bottom of this list because it was never designed to be good. It was designed to be disposable. Number 19, Mitsubishi J8M Shusui. If the Tsurugi represented desperation through simplicity, the Shusui represented desperation through raw danger. Based on reports and photographs of the German Mi-163 Comet, this was Japan's attempt at a rocket-powered interceptor, meant to climb almost vertically into formations of American B-29 bombers and shred them before diving away. The problem was the fuel. The rocket engine ran on two highly volatile chemical propellants that ignited on contact with each other, and that combination was as dangerous to the ground crew loading it as it was to any enemy aircraft. On July 7, 1945, test pilot Lieutenant Commander Toyohiko Inuzuka took the only powered Shusui into the air. The engine flamed out shortly after a steep climb, and the aircraft crashed, killing him. No second powered flight ever followed. The Shusui never became operational, and the very fuel that was supposed to make it lethal to the enemy is what made it lethal to its own pilot first. Number 18, Nakajima Kikka. Japan's first jet aircraft was born from nothing more than photographs and second-hand reports about the German Mi-262, since no blueprints ever made it across the war-torn supply routes to Tokyo. Engineers at Nakajima reverse-engineered the concept using the Na-20 turbojet, a Japanese-built engine with a fraction of the thrust of its German inspiration. The Kikka flew for the first time on August 7, 1945, just days before the war ended. Its second flight, days later, failed when a rocket-assisted takeoff booster malfunctioned, damaging the aircraft on the runway. There was no third flight. The war ended before engineers could resolve the engine's weak thrust output or gather any meaningful combat data. It ranks this low not because it was a bad design on paper, but because it never had the chance to prove whether the concept could actually work in the air Japan needed it to defend. Number 17, Kyushu J7W Shiden. The Shiden looked like nothing else Japan built during the war. A canard pusher-propeller interceptor with its main wing at the back and small control surfaces up front, designed purely to climb fast and hit American bombers hard with four 30mm cannons in the nose. On paper, the layout promised excellent visibility and a devastating gun platform. In practice, only a handful of prototypes were completed, and the first flight in August 1945 revealed vibration problems and handling issues tied directly to the unconventional canard layout, along with concerns about propeller ground clearance during takeoff. Test pilots reported the aircraft required careful handling that traditional Japanese fighters didn't demand. The war ended before any of these problems could be worked out, and the Shiden never fired its cannons at a single enemy aircraft. It ranks here because its ambition outran the time Japan had left to perfect it. Number 16, Mitsubishi A6M and roof. Take the legendary Zero and bolt a large central float and two stabilizing floats underneath it, and you get the roof, a fighter built to operate from forward Pacific bases and anchorages where no airstrip existed. The floats solve a real logistical problem, letting Japan project fighter cover over island chains without waiting for engineers to carve out a runway. But floats are dead weight and dead drag, and the roof paid for that logistical flexibility with a significant loss in speed, climb rate, and maneuverability compared to the wheeled Zero it was based on. It saw real combat in places like the Aleutians and the Solomons, and pilots who flew it respected its handling on the water, but against land-based American fighters arriving in growing numbers, it was consistently outclassed. It ranks low because it sacrificed the very qualities that made the Zero great in exchange for basing flexibility Japan increasingly couldn't use to its advantage. Number 15, Kawanishi N1K2-J Shiden Kai. The Kyofu was designed for the same reason as the roof, a floatplane fighter meant to support amphibious landings without needing captured airfields first. Unlike the roof, it wasn't a converted land fighter but a dedicated floatplane design from the start, and it still suffered the same fundamental problem. The float and its supporting struts added enormous drag, leaving the aircraft heavy, sluggish to climb, and slow compared to contemporary land-based fighters. Pilots found it stable but underpowered for the fights they were increasingly being asked to have. What earns the Kyofu a place on this list rather than total obscurity is what came after it. Engineers took its wing design, removed the floats, added conventional landing gear, and used it as the starting point for the N1K2-J Shiden and eventually the outstanding N1K2-J Shiden Kai. The Kyofu itself was a mediocre fighter, but as a stepping stone toward one of Japan's best aircraft, it mattered. Number 14, Nakajima Ki-27. Before the Zero, before the Hayabusa, there was the Ki-27, the fighter that gave Japan its early air superiority over China, and at the brutal battles of Namenen against the Soviets in 1939. It had fixed landing gear, fabric-covered wings, and was built almost entirely around one virtue: tight, effortless turning ability. Pilots loved how it handled in a dogfight. But by the time the Pacific War began in 1941, that single strength wasn't enough. It was slower than the American P-40 and the Wildcat, carried weak armament, and had no armor or self-sealing fuel tanks to protect its pilot. Its agility let veteran pilots survive longer than the aircraft specs suggested they should, but against faster, better-armed opponents flying different tactics, the Ki-27's era of dominance was already over. It ranks here because it was a fighter still fighting the previous war. Number 13, Kawasaki Ki-45 Toryu. The Toryu was originally meant to be a long-range escort fighter, protecting bombers deep into enemy territory. It was too slow and too unwieldy for that job against single-engine opposition, and Japanese commanders quickly realized a twin-engine heavy fighter simply couldn't outturn or outrun the fighters it was supposed to fight alongside. Rather than scrap it, engineers gave it a second life as a night fighter, mounting oblique firing cannons that let it slide beneath AB-29 and rake its belly without a difficult deflection shot, a tactic borrowed conceptually from German night fighters. In that specific role, late in the war, it had genuine success. But its underpowered engines were unreliable at altitude, and crews frequently reported mechanical trouble on long patrols. It ranks here because it failed at its original job and only found a narrow niche where its flaws mattered less. Number 12, Nakajima Ki-43, a Hayabusa. The Hayabusa would eventually become one of the most trusted fighters in the Japanese army, but its first production version earns a spot near the bottom of this ranking for one simple reason: firepower. The Ki-43I carried only two rifle-caliber 7.7mm machine guns, a configuration barely adequate against early war opponents and increasingly useless against aircraft with self-sealing tanks and armor plating. Pilots reported chasing down enemy fighters, lining up perfect shots, and watching their targets fly home anyway because the guns simply didn't hit hard enough to finish the job. The airframe itself was light and wonderfully maneuverable, continuing the philosophy of the Ki-27 before it, but that same lightness meant poor survivability once hit. Later variants would fix the armament problem. This one didn't, and it ranks here because a fighter that can't finish a fight isn't doing its job. Number 11, Mitsubishi Ki-46-3, Interceptor Conversion. The Ki-46 began its life as one of the best reconnaissance aircraft of the war, fast, sleek, and capable of flying high enough to avoid most interceptors entirely. That altitude performance is exactly why, late in the war, Japan tried converting it into a makeshift interceptor against high-flying B-29 raids, fitting forward-firing cannon into an airframe that was never built to carry them or to maneuver in a dogfight. The altitude capability was real and useful, but the conversion compromised everything else. Armament remained light for the job, and the aircraft had none of the agility a proper interceptor needed to line up a shot against a bomber formation. It saw limited use and limited success. It ranks here as a symbol of Japan's late war pattern of adapting existing airframes because there wasn't time or material left to build dedicated interceptors from scratch. Now moving the best World War II Japanese fighter. Number 10, Nakajima Ki-43-2, 7-3 Hayabusa improved. This is the aircraft the early Ki-43. I should have been from the start. Later production runs added a pair of 12.7mm machine guns in place of the underpowered rifle-caliber weapons, along with armor plating for the pilot and self-sealing fuel tanks, all while keeping the light, nimble handling that made the airframe famous in the first place. It became the most numerous fighter in the Japanese Army's inventory, flown over Burma, China, and countless Pacific islands. Pilots trusted its turning ability enough to outmaneuver far more heavily armed opponents in the early years of the war, and it remained a workhorse fighter from the opening campaigns almost to the end. It was eventually outclassed by newer American designs, but its combination of genuine fixes to its early flaws and its sheer numbers in service earn it a place at the start of this legendary tier. Number 9. Nakajima Ki-44 Shoki Tojo. The Shoki was built around a single ruthless priority: speed and climb rate at the expense of almost everything else. Its stubby wings gave it a fast rate of climb ideal for intercepting bombers, but that same wing design made it far less forgiving in a turning fight than the Hayabusa or the Zero, and pilots initially complained about heavy controls and poor visibility over the nose, especially during landing. Many pilots simply didn't like flying it at first. But as American B-29 raids intensified over the Japanese home islands, that climb rate became exactly what point defense squadrons needed: get up fast, hit the bomber stream, and get back down. Once pilots adjusted to its unforgiving handling, it proved to be one of the more effective interceptors Japan fielded against high-altitude raids, and its reputation shifted from disliked to respected as the air war over Japan grew more desperate. Number 8. Mitsubishi J2M Raiden Jack. Unlike almost every other Japanese fighter on this list, the Raiden wasn't designed to dogfight. It was built purely to climb fast and shoot down bombers. That specialization caused real early problems. The bulged fuselage needed to house its engine created poor forward visibility for the pilot, and development dragged on for years as engineers wrestled with engine reliability. By the time those issues were resolved in 1944, the Raiden had become one of the most effective bomber interceptors Japan possessed, armed with 4 20mm cannons capable of shredding a B-29 in a single pass. Pilots who flew the mature version respected its firepower and climb performance, even if it never handled like a Zero in a turning fight. It ranks here because it took years to become what it was designed to be, but when it finally arrived, it did exactly the job it was built for. Number 7. Nakajima J1 and Gekkō Irving. The Gekkō is a story of a failed idea turning into a genuine success. It was originally designed as a long-range twin-engine escort fighter, a concept that fell apart almost immediately because no twin-engine aircraft of that era could outturn single-engine opposition over long distances. Rather than scrap the airframe, Japanese engineers converted it into a night fighter, fitting oblique-mounted cannons that let it approach a B-29 from below and fire upward into its unprotected belly, and in later versions adding radar to help find targets in total darkness. In that role, it became one of the Imperial Navy's most successful night interceptors of the war. Crews valued the reliability of its twin engines on long night patrols, and the genuine tactical advantage radar gave them over single-engine night fighters flying blind. It ranks here because its original mission failed completely, but its second life made it genuinely dangerous. Number 6. Kawasaki Ki-61 Hien Tony. The Hien was the only Japanese fighter built around a liquid-cooled inline engine in significant numbers, giving it a slim profile that European pilots would have recognized instantly, along with better armor and diving performance than most of its Japanese contemporaries. That protection and diving speed earned real respect from pilots, who could survive hits and dive away from fights that would have been fatal in a lighter airframe. The problem was the engine itself, a licensed copy of a German Daimler-Benz design that Kawasaki struggled to manufacture reliably, leaving squadrons with airframes sitting grounded for lack of working engines, and maintenance crews fighting constant mechanical failures in field conditions far from Japan's best factories. It ranks here solidly in the legendary tier, because when the engine worked, pilots trusted the aircraft completely. The tragedy is how often it didn't. Number 5. Kawasaki Ki-100. The Ki-100 exists because of a crisis. When engine shortages left a stockpile of Ki-61 airframes sitting uselessly on the ground with nothing to power them, engineers made a decision born purely out of necessity: fit them with a reliable, proven radial engine instead of waiting for more inline engines that weren't coming. The result exceeded every expectation. The Ki-100 turned out to be more maneuverable, more reliable, and better performing at altitude than the aircraft it replaced, and pilots who flew both immediately preferred the new version. It became one of the best all-around Japanese fighters of the entire war, arriving only months before the surrender and proving effective against even the latest American fighters it encountered. It ranks this high because it demonstrated that Japan's aviation industry, even while collapsing under material shortages, could still produce a genuinely excellent aircraft out of pure improvisation. Number 4. Kawanishi N1K2-J Shiden Kai George. This aircraft's lineage runs directly back through the mediocre floatplane Kyofu and the troubled N1K2-J Shiden, which suffered landing gear failures from mounting a low-slung wing design for a floatplane onto a land-based fighter. Engineers solved that with a full redesign, moving to a proper low-wing configuration with reliable retractable gear, and the resulting Shiden Kai became one of the most formidable fighters Japan ever fielded. It could match American Hellcats and Corsairs in maneuverability while carrying 4 20mm cannons for devastating firepower. It was flown by the elite 343rd Naval Air Group, staffed with veteran aces who used it to genuinely challenge American air superiority in the final year of the war. Allied pilots who encountered it respected and feared it in equal measure. It ranks this high because it represents a complete success story, a troubled lineage that ended in one of the war's best fighters. Number 3. Nakajima Ki-27 Hayate Frank. Ask historians which Japanese Army fighter came closest to matching the best American and European aircraft of the war, and the Hayate is usually the answer. It combined genuine speed, an excellent climb rate, heavy armament of 2 20mm cannons and 2 12.7mm machine guns, and maneuverability that let it compete directly with the P-51 Mustang and F-6F Hellcat. Pilots trusted it more than almost any other aircraft in Japanese Army service, and in the hands of an experienced flyer with a properly built airframe and quality fuel, it was a genuinely dangerous opponent. Its one great weakness wasn't the design, it was the manufacturing conditions surrounding it. Late-war fuel and metal shortages caused declining build quality and reliability problems in many production examples, masking just how good the underlying aircraft actually was. It ranks this high because on paper, and in the right hands, it was as good as anything Japan built. Number 2. Mitsubishi Ki-83. Very few pilots ever flew this aircraft, and it never once fired its guns at an enemy in combat, yet test pilots and engineers who evaluated it considered it among the best-performing Japanese aircraft of the entire war. This twin-engine heavy fighter demonstrated exceptional speed and maneuverability during trials that impressed everyone who flew it, but production constraints and the accelerating collapse of Japan's war effort meant only a handful were ever built, and none reached an operational squadron before the surrender. It ranks this high not because of what it did, but because of what it proved was possible. Even in 1945, with factories starved of materials and fuel, Japanese engineers were still capable of designing an aircraft that could have rivaled anything in the sky. The Ki-83 is a glimpse of the fighter force Japan might have fielded with more time and more resources. Number 1. Mitsubishi A6M Zero. There's only one aircraft that could sit at the top of this ranking, and it is the one every viewer already expected. When the Zero appeared over China, and then the Pacific in 1940 and 1941, it shocked Allied pilots with a combination of range, climb rate, and turning ability that nothing in American or British service could match. It sacrificed armor and self-sealing fuel tanks to achieve that performance, a trade-off that made it devastating in the hands of an experienced pilot early in the war and dangerously vulnerable once Allied tactics and newer aircraft caught up to it. It remained in frontline service for the entire war out of both necessity and continued capability, and it became the single most recognizable symbol of Japanese naval aviation in every history book, museum, and documentary made since. It earns the top spot not just for what it could do in 1941, but for the legendary reputation it carries to this. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button for more military history content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.